Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy.
Today, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Irish-Australian author Esther Campion. Esther is the author of 3 novels, Leaving Ocean Road, The House of Second Chances, and most recently, A Week to Remember. Released by Hachette a little over a month ago now, A Week to Remember is a heartwarming story that has the warmth and satisfaction of a Maeve Binchy or Monica McInerney novel. Set between Ireland and Tasmania, it's a hopeful story about family, love and second chances that will delight readers and have them yearning to travel once more. Welcome to the podcast, Esther.
Thank you so much, Claudine. I'm delighted to be talking to you this morning.
And I'm delighted to be talking to you. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but it's the first of your novels I've had the chance to read. But I loved this book on so many levels. I'm a huge fan of Maeve Binchy's work and also of Monica McInerney's. How does it make you feel to have your work compared to other authors in this way?
It's absolutely terrified, if I were quite honest, Claudine. I was completely humbled. I mean, these names, I wouldn't have heard of Monica McInerney until I came to Australia, but quickly realised how massive she is, and loved, I've read a few of her books now, but the standout was The House of Memories. Loved that book. But Maeve Binchy would have been a household name in Ireland, from the time Light a Penny Candle was released in 1982. And I would have seen my mother reading Maeve Binchy books. I didn't come to her myself until I was in my 30s, and I've read her since. Just absolutely love Maeve Binchy's books. So she's a bit of a god, to me. So I was very saddened when I heard she died there a few years ago now. But I think I watched all her YouTube videos as my way of marking her passing. But definitely, what a legacy, I'm still reading her wonderful works, and to be compared in any way at all, to be put in the same sentences as Maeve and, people like Monica McInerney is a huge honour. And I'm both terrified, but also very delighted.
It's well-deserved praise for your book. So I wanted to ask you, are you happy with the way the book's been received so far?
Oh, I'm thrilled altogether. Yeah, I'm not much for the kind of figures and all that kind of side of it. I just love I suppose we all like when people say nice things about us, but it is, I suppose it's like writing, as you know well yourself. It's a bit of a slog, it's work. It's a bit like study. You've got to do it to have anything to show for yourself, and you're quite isolated when you're doing it. But then of course that's the sort of beginnings of it. Then you get, if you're lucky, you get to the stage where you work with a team on putting it together as something that will appear in bookshops and on people's bookshelves, and maybe their nightstands, they're reading it of a night. So it's a lovely process. I love the process of it all. And of course, if it's, when it's well received and you get good reviews, I take it as a bit of a pat on the back, not just for myself, but for the fabulous talent in the publishing house, and people, reading it voluntarily for reviews, honest reviews, people who do blogs, and people like yourself, welcoming me and giving me a chance to have a chat about it. It's all good.
Ah, fantastic. So well said. So Esther, for those who haven't had the chance to read this beautiful book yet, can you tell me more about the story?
I can, and I'm absolutely delighted that you haven't read my previous novels and you love this one, because I think some people are worried that my books are a bit linked, and they are a bit linked. They're loosely connected, and you wouldn't have to read one, to enjoy another. But if you did want to read the 3 of them, that's great as well. But A Week to Remember is mostly set in West Cork in Ireland, and there's a guest house called Lizzie O's, and it is a newly renovated farmhouse, and it's about to take in its first guests for a week in the Irish winter that none of them will forget, really. I have a collection of characters who are guests in the house for various reasons. I've got Mick and Aisling Fitzgerald. They're Irish, but they live in Tasmania. They're Irish Australians. And they go there to celebrate a wedding anniversary. But Aisling has got some secret that she is carrying around that will threaten the whole lovely holiday idea. Her mother-in-law, Lillian Fitzgerald, Lily Fitz, she goes to Tassie to both house sit and sort of mind the grandchildren. And she has a lovely adventure of her own in Tasmania. And I really enjoyed setting part of the novel right where I live, where I walk my dog, beaches I walk my dog along of a day when I have a day off. Then I have a dentist from Cork, the city I'm from, and his practice manager is trying to, I suppose, get rid of him for a week. He escapes down to West Cork, where he actually has roots that he has forgotten a little bit. One of my very important characters is Katie Daly. She has spent about 35 years away from the place. She's originally from there. And she comes back after this long absence when her sister begs her to look after their aging mother while she goes up to Spain for a week. And for reasons which I won't give away, she doesn't stay with her mother, but she opts to stay in this guest house. And then the other character I'll mention is Mia Montgomery, who is in her early 30s. She goes to the guest house. She's recently arrived in Ireland to live through her husband's work. And she takes herself off to this guest house for a week without telling him. So I hope that gives a bit of a taster.
It's certainly a rich story filled with so many different characters and their interesting backstories. So I wanted to ask you, Esther, what inspired you to write this book?
I think it is a little bit like what happened with when I finished my first book. A couple of the characters, I don't know whether I wouldn't let them go or whether they wouldn't let me go. I'm not sure. The brain chemistry works around that. But I definitely had a longing to have a couple of the minor characters in my first book, Leaving Ocean Road, to bring them out and put them centre stage, as it were, in the House of Second Chances. And I ended up with Colette Barry and Aidan O'Shea, interior designer and a builder, putting them together in this house I write about in West Cork and having them do the renovation of that property as a kind of a backdrop to the story. And when that renovation was then finished, I was left with, well, and that book was finished, my thoughts were around, well, what's going to happen to that house now? And I had the idea for my main character in my first book to actually return to Ireland and run the house as a guest house. And then I was very keen to write about the house in its working form as a guest house. And then I populated it with the characters of this book, A Week to Remember.
That brings us to Lizzie O's, the guest house in West Cork that our characters spend the week in. So was this inspired by a real place?
I think the short answer to that is probably no. There's no real house, but there are so many beautiful properties in Ireland. I love West Cork. I have a long held in Ireland. The word for love is grow, and we would just say we have a long held grow for the place. And since my late teens, I was introduced to the area by a friend who invited me down to stay with her family in a massive, call it a mobile home, but it's like a kind of a static caravan that doesn't go anywhere. But anyway, I stayed in that. Every time I go home, I drag the family down to the particular place. Is called Crookhaven, and I bring them down there. And I had lovely holidays myself in a place called Crosshaven, which I throw into this book as well, A Week to Remember. It gets a mention. So I've kind of got a history, I suppose, of these lovely places, and I've always admired these lovely properties. You know those places with the coloured ivy growing up the walls and things like that. They're all a bit kind of charming and idyllic. So I suppose, yeah, that was the easy truth. to sort of imagine one of those properties.
Yeah, and I have to say that the scenes in your book were so alive with the glorious tranquility of these seaside settings, not only in Ireland and in West Cork, but in Tasmania as well. So, was it important to you to recreate these settings? Is it a homage to the places that you've lived in and spent time in?
Yes, Claudine. I feel like a bit of a fraud writing about places that I kind of don't know very well, or some people create fantastic story worlds around purely imagined places. But I have a strong connection. I've worked out, in recent years through the writing, a very strong connection to place. And it takes, like, I've moved through, with my husband's work, we lived in different countries, lived in different Australian states. And that's always been hugely, I suppose, kind of a heavy thing for me to deal with. I always find new places. Well, I suppose maybe the nature of the places I've moved to. I moved, for example, from Norway to South Australia one January weekend, like when you go from -9 to 36 degrees, the contrast is quite stark, and it takes probably years for a landscape to get under my skin to the point where I feel comfortable enough but also worthy really of writing about these places. I just feel I like to write about these places with an authentic voice, and because these places mean so much to me, I feel that maybe, yes, this is why the response about landscape has been quite strong.
Esther, so much of this book is about overcoming events in the past that have or can shape the future, or a person's future, I should say, and also about the power of forgiveness. Is this something that you consciously wanted to explore?
Well, I'd be very honest with you, Claudine. There's not much conscious going into any of this in the beginning stages. Anyway, I'll tell you the drafting, because I am one of these seat of the pants writers. I just read what I did the day before or the week before or the 3 weeks before, in my case sometimes, and I just keep going. So I don't plot. I don't have much idea where it's all going to go, but I just kind of tip away. I suppose when I was coming to writing, whatever, 10, 12 years ago, I suppose I kind of was a bit hung up about things like, what am I going to write? What kind of stories am I going to write? And, will I try this? And will I try this genre and that genre? And maybe, when you get your rejections, you think, maybe I'm rubbish at writing women's fiction. Maybe I shouldn't be writing that at all. Maybe try some fantasy or something. But I find that I just write what comes out, really, or what's in there. So, and I'm happy with that. So I think you've got to remember, I think, that writing is a creative pursuit, and we're all unique. So one person's approach to it might be different to another's, and what one person, and the imagination is a wonderful thing. What some people can imagine, like I be in awe of it, but wouldn't be what I could imagine, So I just kind of happy with whatever comes out, really.
So we were talking a little bit before I started recording, just as a bit of a heads up, but there was a thread in this story that I found personally fascinating. As someone who spent a few years writing and talking about seaweed, Ireland has a thriving seaweed culture and industry, something people may not know. Irish people are well versed in the health benefits of different seaweeds, not only as a whole food, but in various applications like bath soaps and skin products, etc. So I wanted to ask you, tell me, why was this something that you wanted to explore in the book? Was it a product of the setting or something else?
Well, I'm just so delighted, Claudine, that you picked up on the seaweed, because, I was afraid people would think, that hippie stuff, like what's she on about, And I think I threw it into everything. I threw it into, like, when you go to a nice hotel and you get those lovely products and you bring them home. Well, I had my guests, they go on the seaweed tour, and I'm not giving too much away. There's just little extras, but they all get the little sachet of the seaweeds for the bath thing, and a couple of them have the bath and this kind of stuff. And I was delighting in writing this and imagining, like, the smells and the whole lot, like, and tramping around the shoreline. And of course, I did a degree in zoology, and I would have done that. We would have been taken off. And I'm from the inner city, Claudine, so I think that that also, like, we didn't have blade grass where I grew up. So the whole thing about being in the outdoors and, throwing around, those squares for the quadrant samples and things like that, and counting what and looking at species and the distribution of species on the shoreline, all that kind of stuff. I loved that stuff when I was an undergraduate student, and to be able to draw from that experience, about 35 years later, it's an absolute joy. And I have a very good friend in Ireland who has worked in biology for all of her life. And her Facebook posts about what she was finding on the shore in Cork and what she was doing with seaweed really inspired me. And if anyone reads acknowledgements in the back of the book, you'll find I call her the Queen of Seaweed. And she gave me plenty help with that. I was a bit terrified, because I wouldn't be an expert in seaweed, or not an expert in much really. But I kind of had the fear that I wouldn't be able to write it properly. But I just enjoyed it so much that I think it came across, just lovely. But seaweed is hugely important, I think, for the future as a food source, and in terms of the economy and jobs. I think it's definitely on the up. So I'm pleased I highlighted it in that sense, but also in the sense of the sheer enjoyment of, and even things like of it, being around it, and what you might do with it, but also the names of these species like a Spoffin, Nodosum, and Dulce, and Dillisk, and Carrageen, and words like that. I suppose because I am a writer, I love words anyway, but all those kind of things start popping into my head, and just took me back, I suppose. Yeah.
I was saying to you before we started recording that I nearly fell off my chair when you mentioned a prominent Irish seaweed advocate in your book, someone called Franny Rattigan, because I had the very great fortune to work with Franny, who is a doctor and author of a popular book called The Irish Seaweed Kitchen back in 2014 for my own seaweed book. I was just blown away by that. So much so that I ran upstairs to try and dig out Franny's book. And I was just, leafing through it again and reminding myself of Franny's work. And I remember her telling me at one stage, just to go back to how important seaweed is in Ireland and how ubiquitous it is in Ireland. She'd say that, they'd go down to the beach and just forage for their own dulse, and then they'd keep bags of it around the house or even on the dashboard in the car, and they just eat it like a snack. Back in 2014, we'd be like, we hope that this is going to be the case soon in Australia. We really want to make people aware of how wonderful seaweed is, just for its health benefits and as you said, for the economy and also the environment.
Absolutely. And if you go back to like famine times in Ireland, people would have gone and harvested seaweed from the shore, in times of the Great Hunger as well.
Yes.
So I feel seaweed has probably suffered from a bit of a bad press, and people think, oh, it's disgusting and slimy and all this, and I probably would be guilty of that myself. But as I'm a bit older and wiser now, I'm sort of I was very happy to do a little bit of research around it again, and some of my own friends, not just Frances but others, they're involved in the seaweed industry, and I'm so proud of them. This is really groundbreaking stuff, like bringing this all back. I think, and like a lot of things, I suppose we lose the way. Like we think, all of our new ways are best, but some of the old ways, of course, are fantastic, and we can learn an awful lot from our forebears. Really, if we just take the time and the interest. Yeah.
There's a wonderful scene in the local pub in this book in which a poetry competition is judged. Not only really just discovered slam poetry and what it's all about, such a powerful medium. And the poem that Connor delivers in this scene is a wonderful example. So it made me wonder if you write other poetry.
I do, Claudine. I do. I have some published poems, I'm quite proud to say. Not many, but some. And look, I wouldn't consider myself a poet in terms of like that's what I do like every day. Because I don't like poems have to kind of grab me. An idea from a poem has to grab me before I sit down and write it. I was on my way to Hobart a couple of weeks ago for a bit of a book thing, and I actually found myself writing a poem, but it's a bit haphazard. Well, everything is with me is a bit haphazard, to be honest, Claudine. But that, like, I hadn't written a poem for, I'd say, maybe a year and a half or something, or maybe since I wrote that poem for the book. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Writing that poem, I was a little bit worried, and I'm very, very grateful for the positive response to that poem. I don't do slam poetry. I went to, myself and my daughter were very fortunate. We went to the Sydney Opera House for the finals of the semis and the finals of the slam poetry, or the New South Wales final, I think, and the national final. And some very fine Tasmanian slam poets as well were there. It's it's not a discipline, I suppose, it's a passion. It's a wonderful thing. But I had to go, and I felt that it was the right type of poetry for this particular scene in the pub you're talking about. There's a lot of kind of motion behind it. But yes, when I started writing, Claudine, in my early 40s, I joined a writing group, more out of accident, by accident than anything else. I was looking for a creative writing course, and there wasn't one in Port Lincoln in South Australia where I moved to, and I rang the local writing group to find out if they knew of one, and because I'd only looked at the local TAFE, and they said, no, there's none, but why don't you join us? So when I joined them, then it was the first kind of thing they were doing. They were doing all these kind of different writing activities, having writing prompts and things at the meetings, and poetry would have been the first thing they, I suppose, challenged me to write. And I just went with everything in the old activity at all. I just threw myself into it. So that's when I started writing. Well, I mean, I would have written poetry, that's sad, angst-ridden poetry in my teens. I think we all write. But apart from that, I'd never written a poem through my adult life until then.
I loved that poem, and I could hear it in my head. I could hear him, as you said, breathing around the words, and it was just so beautiful. It took my breath away. So thank you for that. It was just lovely.
Thank you so much. I read that means an awful lot to me.
What would you like most for people to take away from this book?
That's a hard old question in itself. I just want them to enjoy it. I want them to, I suppose, like what I get from reading a good book, that's escape for one into a world other than your own. A bit of a laugh. I'd like them to get a bit of a giggle at times, hopefully. I have a few lighter moments in the book. There are heavy themes, but there are also lighter moments. And I suppose the relatability, we all get thrown curveballs in life, and there's none of us, we're all flawed characters, none of us perfect, but we do the best we can.
There are many writers who listen to this podcast, so I wondered, given your experiences, if you had any tips that you could offer aspiring writers working on their manuscript, or those who are trying to seek publication of their work.
That's a really good question. I mean, I would never have imagined that I would be the person sitting here in a study with a lovely desk and, and a WIP, what you call work in progress, on my computer. I would never imagined a time when I would be the person answering that question. I spent a long time asking that question or searching for, I was listening to your own podcast earlier with, I think, Danielle, I can't remember her name. You have to give it to you. You did a mashup podcast with her.
Oh, Danny V, yes.
Yes, Danny V. And you were talking in particular about that very thing. When you're an aspiring writer, you are looking for tips and tricks from other more established authors, people that have been published, and looking for things about their journey. But one thing that really stands out to me is that, well, a lot of people seem to give rules as advice for writing, rules around word count and daily writing practice and all sorts of, rules. As I say, I can only speak from my own personal journey, and I wouldn't presume to know about anybody else's circumstances. But I have a family, I have a job, I have my own kind of mental and physical health thing that I'm kind of going on. And I really have found I make up my own rules. I'm accountable. I do have another 2-book deal. I'm very, very grateful to my publisher, Hachette. And I'm terrified about having the next book in on time because I'm in the early stages of it. But I'm also looking back and thinking, I have a process. It mightn't be the same as anybody else's process, but there's a bit of a method to it. And I work very hard when I do get my chances to sit down at my desk. And I make myself sit down at my desk when I can. And I love that. I've described it like a tent. When you open the zip of a tent and you get in and you turn around and you zip it back up behind you and you're kind of in this cocoon. And that's how writing is for me when I'm tapping away at the keyboard. And it's very obvious to my family that I'm writing. Must be a little different to when I'm emailing or something. It must be a different rhythm. But they said, "Oh, you're writing, Mum." Or, she got some writing done today, Mum. And it's like, oh God, isn't that obvious? I'm only surfing the net the rest of the time. But it is about trusting yourself. And I think there's a balance between giving yourself a kick in the butt and making yourself sit in the seat and the bum glue and all the rest of it, and being kind to yourself and getting your cuppa or lighting your candle or whatever you need to get yourself into that kind of cocoon. Yeah, so I would say number one, do it, but do it in a kind way. Don't be bashing yourself over the head.
And if readers wanted to find out more about you and your books, where can they do that?
I have a Facebook page. Esther Campion Author is my Facebook page. And I have an Instagram. I think I'm Esther_Campion on Instagram. I don't have a website or anything, but Hachette, of course, Hachette Books Australia, they have lovely information about me and links to where you can buy the books and that kind of thing. But I'm at this stage now where if you Google me, I come up, which is amazing. Yeah. Or Esther Campion Books or something. Yeah, it's lovely.
Esther, I loved A Week to Remember, a rich, heartwarming story with a bit of armchair travel thrown in. Nothing better in my opinion. Thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
I'm delighted for the opportunity, Claudine. Thank you so much. And to anybody listening in, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.